Hi, hello. Welcome. Sorry for interrupting. Welcome to Berlinale Talents and to Visual Storytelling, the world behind the image. We're very lucky to have you two here on stage, Lauren Greenfield and Kevin Billy. Thanks for being here. That's great. And without much more from my side, I quickly hand over the microphone to the wonderful moderator of the session, Dana Linssen.
Hello. Thank you so much, Hella, and I'm glad that you're giving a warm hand of welcome to the two established guests we have here this afternoon. We're already running late, so that means that you have to be very precise in asking your questions later on. Because first of all, of course, I'm going to talk to Lauren, who is here in the panorama section with her film Generation Wealth that just premiered in Sundance earlier. I'm going to say earlier this year, last month. So, but it feels like, for me, like ages ago. It's a film that's based on a photography project and an art project you've been working on for a very long time. And of course, Lauren is also familiar for many other films and photo projects. I think, which one should we mention? Thin, Queen of Versailles is definitely a film that you will also see back in the film. And my other guest is Kevin B. Lee, who is a co-mentor of mine here at the Berlinale Talents, and our talents are there. So we're happy that they will ask us tomorrow, why did you ask these questions while you're telling us to ask all kinds of other questions? Kevin is a film critic, a filmmaker, and also an established video essayist, an innovator and a champion of the genre. And well, in a bit we will find out exactly what video essays are. I'm really happy that we can talk together this afternoon. We have a lot of clips waiting for you. So since we're here to, I mean, these secrets are staring at us. And when I was preparing the panel, Lauren, I read somewhere that you said that your main interest lies in culture. As a kind of a warming up question, what do you mean with that?
Well, that's kind of what brought me to documentary photography, is being interested in culture. But actually, I was just talking to Kevin about this earlier, that I went on this one-year study during college where we were studying film and anthropology, and we went to 9 countries and studied in the ethnographic institutes and film institutes in those countries, and we lived with families. And we spent like 10 hours a day watching movies, from ethnographic films on basket weaving to fiction films that used ritual. And so on that trip, I realized that my kind of future was going to be looking at culture, but I didn't know at that time if it was going to be through academia or through photography or through filmmaking. I was really just starting those practices, but I just had a sense that that's what I wanted to look at. And it took me a while to kind of figure out what culture.
What culture? Well, we're going to talk about that, and your whole film is about that. So when you decided that you were going to look through a lens, both the lens on the camera of the filmmaker and the photographer, I was wondering, was it also to discover secrets or stuff that you maybe couldn't see with the naked eye?
Well, I guess I didn't think about it so much as secrets, but it was definitely to discover things that I was kind of afraid to just jump out and look at on my own. It was like, in a way, a license to be nosy, to be in other people's business, to gossip, to eavesdrop, and also to like have a sense of adventure and meeting people and kind of crossing the comfort lines of privacy that I would normally like respect. So I think I was very shy in my personal life, but with a camera, it just gave me license to kind of go out into the world and be brave in a different way.
So does that mean that it actually works both ways, that the lens gives you an opportunity to discover something, but also to disguise yourself?
To disguise yourself? No, I think for me, it's actually been more of a bridge, because I think that when I am shooting, I'm in very close connection to the people that I'm shooting. So as I get to know them, they also get to know me. And I guess that kind of relationship is also part of why in this film I kind of expose myself as well, because I think the filter that I am is informing the pictures that I'm taking.
Okay, Kevin, are you a filter that is looking at or creating a filter by looking at media? Is your main interest kind of when Lauren's looking at culture, are you looking at media?
I mean, who isn't these days? I mean, we're all filters and we're all using filters on our social media, our postings. It's amazing that, photography, media production has become so democratized. I mean, that's a nice way to put it, that we're all kind of doing it. And I mean, I think really speaks to your talent that you do it so exceptionally that, we look to the images that you create as an example of what to aspire to, both in terms of what's being represented and the way that you're representing it. But it really speaks to just how dominant media has become. I think this is something that your film touches on, is just how media is proliferating these values and really commoditizing them, that we all are fetishizing it and aspiring to it. And so as artists and critics, what role do we have to establish a more thoughtful engagement with all of this material that we're flooded with on a daily basis? Because it is so easy to be seduced and to be swept away by all this audiovisual stimulation that's coming at us. So yeah, if you were to call this activity a filtering activity, then it's one about the filter of critical awareness and of realizing what it is that images are doing and that what you're doing with them.
And we're obviously going to talk much more about our responsibilities when working in the field of media, which I hope will also be inspiring for everyone in the audience who's also working in media. I was just going to ask you one more quick question before we get to the first clip of Lauren's film, because in what way has this kind of awareness that you were just talking about informed your work as a video essayist? And also, could you describe really quickly how you got from making the traditional video essay to where you're now?
Yeah, and I should acknowledge that I was actually a talent about years ago. Standing where you are, or sitting where you are now, trying to learn from other people who are established in the field. I was a director talent, but the funny thing is that I spent the whole week, because I think a lot of you are using this time to network and meet other people and get some projects off the ground. I saw like 20 movies that week. I mean, those were the things I wanted to mingle with. So again, the power of images and being kind of, knowing who your cohort is. Like Berlinale was my discovery of just how amazing the world of cinema was. I had never been exposed to this type of environment before. And I just kept watching films, and to the point that I wanted that to be my medium of choice in terms of my subject matter. So that's what led me to apply my filmmaking background to understanding and analyzing films. So I started making these short online videos, and that was at the time when YouTube was just getting off the ground, so it was sort of the right place at the right time, that there was an audience that was interested in seeing videos that were talking about film. And yeah, then it just kind of led one thing to another. And we were talking about, because a lot of these go viral. There was 2 years ago that I was on the stage with Kogonada, who was another video essayist who actually then made a feature film that was in Sundance last year. So this actually becomes an unexpected way to open other doors for filmmaking as we traditionally understand it. But then there are other people who are making a full-time living doing this kind of work, and who would have imagined that was possible 5 or 10 years ago. And they're also very useful as teaching tools, because you're a Harvard alumni, and you were talking about how Robert Gardner had a huge role in your education and your development. And I made a video essay about him, and it didn't go viral per se, but it was still useful. It was still very useful as an educational, like it was being used in classrooms whenever Robert Gardner was being taught. So it's about kind of knowing what roles you can play that you hadn't thought of before, sort of being open to the possibility of discovery and using that as a way to realize what your true talents are. So.
Thank you, Kevin. So let's go to the first clip, which is kind of from the opening of your film Generation Wealth. It's a rather long clip, about 3 minutes, but at the same time, it'll give you a long and good introduction, a very profound way of your agenda with the film. So we'll have some hooks to talk about that afterwards. So let's watch the first clip.
I've been a photographer for 25 years, with my lens focused on wealth and the excesses of our culture. The scale of the excess became clear when I documented the family building the largest house in America. I noticed that no matter how much people had, they still wanted more. I wondered if the hundreds of individual stories I had shot about money, fame, sex, body image, even plastic surgery for dogs, were all connected, and what they said about us. To understand what it all added up to, in 2008, I began working on a book and exhibition about wealth. It would take me back to my earliest work. In 1991, I was just starting out as a photojournalist. I had studied visual anthropology in college and landed my first assignment with National Geographic, photographing a Maya Indian village in Chiapas, Mexico. My mom was a professor of psychology and had been doing research there 20 years before, so we worked together on the project. My mother was at home there and spoke the language, but I struggled to understand the culture and found it really hard to be accepted into people's lives. After we had spent months in the field, National Geographic killed the story. I was devastated. I almost quit photography. My boyfriend sent me a tape to encourage me.
Hey Laura, Frank here. I just got your letters today. I really, really miss you. Go out and do your photography and be aggressive. The more you put yourself into this kind of work, you're going to end up confident about looking for jobs and everything else. So please work hard, okay?
Frank helped me see that I shouldn't give up, and that I needed to find a story where I had a deeper connection to the subject. I happened to find an old copy of Bret Easton Ellis's Less Than Zero. The fictional world he depicted of jaded excess and too much money resonated with what I remembered growing up in LA. I started thinking about my own culture in almost anthropological terms, and realized I wanted to go home and explore it.
Okay, yeah. I think this is a nice warming up for those of you who haven't seen the film to go and see it. Thank you, Lauren. You end with this kind of intriguing sentence that you wanted to look at your own work and your own world in these anthropological terms. And of course, the easy question would be, and the hard answer, what are those anthropological terms?
Well, I think when I was with the Maya, this came off of kind of studying visual anthropology on this trip around the world, and often being in places where I really had no idea kind of what I was seeing. And as I was with the Maya, struggling with the Maya language, which was the only language that the women spoke, and really trying to figure out what their culture was about and what I, as a foreigner kind of new to it, could say about it. I just started thinking that if I went to my own culture, I would just have so much more understanding to bring to the party and kind of begin with it. And so as I was like really having a tough time getting access, it was also a place where people did not want to be on camera. And I was thinking, they think a photograph takes your soul, and I was thinking about how in LA, where I'm from, people might like being on camera. And I just started thinking about the images that I had seen, like Beverly Hills 90210, which were starting to really go around the world and kind of influence youth culture around the world, and Less Than Zero, and how this culture, which had an international export and was influencing so many people, might be worth looking at with the same kind of rigor and scrutiny and kind of long-term look that photojournalists and anthropologists look at other cultures with.
Does that mean that you were working by a specific method or a specific kind of approach?
No, I mean, I play kind of my mom is a social scientist, so I know what I'm doing is not social science. It's more akin to journalism, but it's kind of a like deeply embedded journalism where I spend a lot of time. I think that I go in with a kind of observational perspective where I'm trying to really see things and from, in a way, a cultural point of view in terms of what makes people tick. What are the belief systems? What's the kind of worldview? How does the language shape that worldview or express it? I often use I've always used interviews also. And I'm kind of looking for the subjects being the informants in a way. So it's a kind of
Mixture. Because I was going to ask you, because in the academic world, there are kind of strict sort of...
No, not at all. And I mean, but that said, a lot of sociologists and anthropologists have used my work because they recognize the perspective, but it's not science that I'm doing. It's filmmaking and documentary photography. But there is a kind of sociological perspective in all of it.
So what we've also saw from this clip is that you, in this film, you use a lot of different kind of stylistic devices. You look at your own photographs, you look at yourself, you're being filmed while working, while contemplating how to make the film. Could you talk a bit about how you developed all these kind of different strategies in the film?
Yeah. Well, this was a really different film for me. I mean, Thin, which is about eating disorders in a Florida clinic, is completely pure verite. There's 3 short interviews, and other than that, it's just complete observational. Queen of Versailles, I was in it a little bit more. You hear my voice occasionally, and I'm not in it physically. But then I did a viral spot called Like a Girl, and I was in it for the first time. And so I just started kind of loosening up, I think, about being in it. And I also think because this was a kind of retrospective work and I was looking back over 25 years, I was more introspective myself about the process and maybe wanted to be a little bit more transparent and honest in a way about what we do and how we filter things. Because in my work, people have always kind of accepted the photograph as fact, which is great for people being impacted by it, but as we know, there's a lot of editing and choices going behind that. So, which you bring out in that Bob Gardner piece. So basically, I was kind of halfway through this project when I realized that my journey needed to be the connective thread. And so even though I was kind of reluctant in the beginning, we started also filming the process. And the process was really interesting in making this, but most of it I hadn't documented. But I worked with a curator, and we went through more than 500,000 pictures in my studio, both analog and digital, and spent about 4 years doing this and scanned more than 10,000 pictures. And at the same time, I was shooting new work. So it was kind of like this crazy archaeological dig in my own work. And part of what I found in the process were new discoveries. Like when I was looking through the outtakes of the kids growing up in LA, I found Kim Kardashian at 12 years old. And she had been important when I first did the book on LA kids, but obviously she had become really important for me as a kind of cultural touchstone for Generation Wealth. So So and then the other thing that happened in the work is, in a way, these 25 years was this transformation in technology, both in front of the camera and in my subject in terms of the media, but also in my tools. I went from analog to digital. I started shooting on film, and so you see like me looking at the film, but then, and I started doing the interviews on audio, and then went to video, and then HD, and then 4K, and so I tried to kind of bring in all the
All
pieces
that.
of the process too.
So when you say it's kind of an archaeological approach, and at the same time it's also kind of a multimedia approach, there's
Yeah.
that book staring at us, you're also sort of putting it out on different formats. You could say you make the film, you do the book, you do an exhibition. How do these ways of working inform one another?
Well, the book really came first. It was really like the book was kind of driving the project and the show. And in a way, the film is like the meta of the meta project anyway, because the film is really about my journey doing this. And so all of it kind of becomes a part of the film. But we also, the prints that you saw in that clip, we printed for the edit process thousands of pictures and put them on the wall. And so that was kind of the other piece of it. But the film, in a way, it's the only personal part. The book is really like the reportage document of Generation Wealth. And the film is more about my journey and kind of what it all means.
It seems like that journey sort of goes from curiosity to being very critical about what you're seeing, and you have some people in the film that express that besides yourself. What made you so critical about that?
I think it's seeing all of the things that I saw. I mean, I go into every subject very non-judgmental, but I learn things, along the way that inform my ideas. So for example, when I did the book Girl Culture, which was really about how girls' bodies have become the primary expression of identity and the kind of exhibitionism of feminine culture, and how girls are influenced by advertising and media, I started out really kind of looking at this, interested in how girls create their identities. But I came out the other side a feminist because of what I saw. And so I think with this work, I've had a curiosity, but also by the end had a feeling that if we stay on this track, we're headed for disaster. And so there is a sense of impending doom in the movie, and the kind of decline of empire and dancing on the deck of the Titanic. And I think it's because for me, that the financial crash was really a turning point in the Generation Wealth journey, and so many of my subjects felt like they learned from that and they changed because of it, including Jackie and David Siegel from The Queen of Versailles. And then everything went right back, and even worse. And so that's where I started in thinking about Generation Wealth.
So we have these enormous, glorious, golden extremities on the one side, and you also say something about looking at the extreme is a way to understand actually kind of the larger part of society in your film. And then Kevin, who has been working together with a French scholar and video essayist, Chloé Galibert-Lenné, on another kind of extreme example of how media aggravates something, and that's violence. Kevin, can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, it's actually a very interesting kind of parallel in terms of how you become more of a character in your project. And it's definitely something happening with me and my collaborator, Chloe, because I've made hundreds of video essays where I'm just kind of analyzing what's happening in the film. And as I've progressed over this period of working, I feel like I've entered the movie more and more. And at the same time, I'm noticing this phenomenon where there are certain aspects of cinema that have entered our kind of everyday mediated lives. And one example being ISIS propaganda videos, which really take on certain qualities of Hollywood action films in some ways, as well as first-person shooter video games and other and selfie videos. So it's ISIS videos have really become interesting to me in terms of how they become almost an index of all the different fascinations of media that are happening in the present. But dealing with this type of subject matter is a completely different proposition than just analyzing, how a Wes Anderson movie does its wonderful use of compositions and so on and so forth. It's really more about implicating your role as a spectator, as a participant, not just in media but in the world. So it's led Chloe and I to do more kind of subjective investigations. We're going to show an example. But I just want to mention that this is now kind of developing into a series of video essays that we're hoping forms into a feature in 10 chapters. So it's my way of dealing with the problem of how do you go from making video essays to a film. Well, let's just make 10 video essays, and it'll become a film in 10 chapters. And it also allows for different manifestations, like it could be a multi-screen installation in a gallery. So this is something to think about in terms of the different possibilities that your image making can manifest itself, because you have many different options. Berlinale is no longer just going to see films in a cinema. Now you have form expanded, you have an installation space. There's even like a TV series program in the Berlinale. So yeah, just thinking about the different options and different forms available and how they speak to you and speak to each other. And I also want to give an acknowledgement to my friend Peter Zorn's in the audience, and because Chloe and I were lucky enough to get an artist residency this summer. Thanks to the Creative Europe, which is a fund from the European Union. I'm saying this just to give you
good advice.
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly. There are artist residencies available for people based in Europe to pursue their visual research. So we have one with the EMAP, European Media Art Platform. Is that correct, Peter? Yes. So and we're one of a handful of residents chosen by a network of 18 institutions across Europe. So just to make you aware that there are opportunities like this available, and maybe you could also talk about Sundance Lab later. These institutions that really give us a leg up. Because I know you guys are probably looking for really practical, like, how do I get there?
No, but this is it. There's life after the Berlinale Talents. There's much more places where you can really go and...
Yeah, I would have never imagined my video essay work to lead me to artist residencies, but it's a crazy world out there. So you can be an Instagram star, you can be an artist resident. So
speaking of stars, let's watch this little clip from Chloe's My Crush Was a Superstar.
Right. So I'll set this up real quick.
So
this is a chapter from Chloe's side where she became fascinated in a social media star from the Islamic State. And so she started to investigate this person's presence online and also investigate her own fascination. So yeah, just like your film is interested in understanding why are we so fascinated in this. So it's really kind of diagnosing her own fascination in this terrorist.
Okay, let's watch the second clip.
Alors que je commençais à peine mes recherches sur les vidéos de Daesh, je tombais sur ce documentaire diffusé sur LCP, intitulé Djihad 2.0. Le film dure presque 1 heure. Vers la moitié, le journaliste amène la discussion vers le thème des publications amateurs de djihadistes sur les réseaux sociaux. Et il mobilise dans son montage plusieurs extraits vidéo trouvés ici et là sur Internet.
Je vais vous présenter mon petit bébé, M60.
Au milieu de cette nasse d'images, donc, un visage m'interpelle.
Réveille-toi. T'es pas en France, c'était au Chêne.
Alors pourquoi ? Parce qu'il est jeune, sans doute, comme moi. Parce que son visage est immédiatement sympathique, ouvert, souriant. Et puis parce qu'il parle français, bien sûr. Et puis il m'intéresse, comme personnage, j'entends. Dans nos échanges, tu te souviens, nous avions décidé qu'il serait bon dans notre film de faire quelques portraits. J'avais même, quelque part dans l'un de mes mails, fait un portrait robot de mon djihadiste idéal.
It's a longer piece, but yeah, it's interesting because we're almost like casting. It's like we're casting at this moment. We're like kind of acknowledging our casting for a documentary. We're looking for an ideal terrorist subject to profile. And it's important to acknowledge that because it's, we never think about why a certain character or person is put in a documentary and the sort of assumptions and stereotypes and ideologies that go behind those decisions. And so it's important to, at least for me, it's important to acknowledge that, to put that in the foreground, because that I hope puts the audience in a more conscious position to think about, how is this story being constructed and what is the nature of our interest in this subject matter and in these people. Yeah, so talking a bit more about position and casting your subjects, because actually I was gonna ask the question to you, Lauren. I mean, you have the same questions, obviously. Where do you position yourself, even coming from a bit of an anthropological tradition, like inside or outside, and how do you cast your subjects? Could you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been kind of straddling an insider outsider line, mostly as a photographer for magazines, that for me to be able to get the kinds of images of the popular culture that you saw, like Tupac Shakur and Selena Gomez and Prince, I'm often there for a magazine. And in a way, that's really the only access that you can get to celebrity culture, which is a hugely influential kind of influence that I need to document. So I'm often kind of using my position in the media to be able to also talk about the media. And so sometimes finding the subjects comes from a magazine assignment. Sometimes it begins with that. Like when I I was photographing, oh, this is why I needed pictures. Okay, I have this picture of these three Versace purses that I made at the Versace store. And I was assigned to follow Donatella Versace for my story for Elle magazine. And while I was there, I was with Donatella for, maybe 15 minutes, and then she left, and I stayed and continued to make pictures. And I ended up meeting Jackie Siegel, who I went to see a year later, and that became the Queen of Versailles film that I spent 3 years on. So a lot of times I kind of get somewhere to begin, but then I make my own way. And I think the casting is, it's really an intuitive process for me. I'm really looking for, like in Generation Wealth, for example, it focuses on kind of 4 main characters. And I'm choosing them because as I started to get back in touch with a lot of the people who had been in my pictures, they had storylines, kind of arcs in their life that for me really told the story of Generation Wealth. So in a way, they represented kind of ideas that I was thinking about and wanting to tell, as well as being compelling characters on film.
So even though you say as you cast rather intuitively, you do reflect on it afterwards, kind of post-mortem once the project is done.
Well, I would say pre, during, and post. There's a lot of reflecting. In fact, we have interns come to the studio every 3 months. And I think what the interns learn when they're there is how much time I'm not in the field. Because there's a huge amount of research before, there's a huge amount of research afterwards. Actually, Sue Welsh is here who helped me with the research on my book, and we probably spent 2 years just on the captions for the book, because not only were we trying to get all the facts straight from when I took the picture, but we were also trying to see what had developed since, and if that impacted our understanding of the picture and now in history where that lay. So this was an enormous editing process. So almost there are 500 pictures, 600 pictures in the book, I think. Almost every picture is part of, from a 1-day to a 4-week story, where there are many characters and thousands of pictures. And so there's kind of choices all the way through.
So if I understand your story about the Versace bags correctly, that came from one project and sort of migrated to another project. So how do you feel about reappropriating material from one project to another?
I mean, it's not really reappropriating in the sense that when I'm working on a project like Wealth, which I've been working on for a while, I'm really looking to only take assignments that help me feed that story, because I kind of feel like if life's too short to not be passionate about the work, and I try to make a living without taking jobs that are not in my kind of interest. And so I was excited to take a story about Donatella Versace because fashion and her as a personality feeds into wealth. But the fun of the discovery, the fun of reportage and verite is that you don't know where it's going to lead. And actually meeting Jackie and finding the Queen of Versailles turned out to be a much deeper look at wealth and the American dream than the beginning of Versace, even though Donatella's in there too. But I mean, my work has always been fueled by kind of self-assignments and a personal mission, and that's kind of the most important driver in anything. And so everything that I see and find feeds into that. And luckily in photography and in photojournalism, the photographers always had copyright. So unlike in film, where you might lose control of your images, it's always been really important to myself and Frank, my husband and producer, that we've always kept ownership of the pictures, not only to make the projects, but also to protect the people in it. So it can't just be appropriated in a way that I don't feel comfortable with my relationship with that person.
I guess I used the word appropriating in a way to, or it had a way too negative sense to it. It's a word I'm using a lot when I talk about video essays and stuff, because actually in video essays, that's what you're doing. You're even taking copyrighted material and using it in another sense. In the clip of your response video essay to Chloe, we're just gonna show in a bit, you reflect on that and how to look at material. So first, could you introduce the clip, The Letter of a Drone, and
Sure. So this is what we're going to see is a short excerpt again from this ongoing project where it's funny because she was interested in this ISIS social media superstar, and I started looking at ISIS propaganda footage, and then but I was thinking, okay, what kind of footage do I want to see? And I was like, I want to watch the safest footage I can think of, because I'm not sure I'm ready for beheading videos or anything really upsetting. So I'd heard that ISIS was using drones in Syria, and so then I started searching online for drone videos shot in Syria, and then I found this, and it actually connected to some research I had done last year. I was a resident again in Berlin in the Harun Farocki Institute. I think some of you might have gone there this morning when there was a tour of the Silent Green Culture Quarter, where the Harun Farocki Institute's office is. And if you don't know who he is, he was really a massively important figure for European film and visual studies culture, really allowing us to see what film, media, and videos do to us and what they do in our society. And he had this really powerful term called the operational image. He originally applied this term towards military technical images, such as those that are used in guided missile imaging, images that are meant for one computer to communicate to another computer as just visual data. So it's images that aren't meant to be seen. But what I'm developing, what I've observed, is that a lot of these images are kind of spilling out into the popular media consciousness, and they have such a fascination, almost like abstract art or avant-garde visual art, that people just become fascinated in them. And so they kind of get seduced and absorbed into this type of images. And so it made me think, well, okay, if these operational images are now involving human spectators, does that mean that human spectators are now part of these military operations? So I started to think about this idea of operational images as images operating on us, that we are the thing that needs to be that technology needs to be mastered. This is a very different, because we used to think that images are sort of within our purview. Images are always for us to work with and master, but there's so many images now that I often think that I'm the one being used by them. And watching your film,
Yeah.
I totally get that feeling as well. Like, who's in control here? So I'm really interested in these questions of what sort of agency, what sort of power can we attribute to images independent of ourselves as a way of redefining and reconnecting with what agency we actually do have.
And that's actually the theme of the movie Generation Wealth, is really like, I've tried to kind of deconstruct the culture in a way that you can see the matrix that you're in and have a little bit of power over it. So in a way, it's really about having some kind of agency and also becoming conscious of what is informing our choices that we're often not conscious of.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, the contradiction is like, the weird thing is like, my desire is often when I actually give up agency. Like even here, when I find myself wanting to watch 6 movies a day, is it really my active, conscious decision to be doing that, or have I just been swept up in some kind of mania of like, oh my
we're
God,
so gonna talk about that in a second.
You're the kid when the kid's in the candy store, how much choice does that kid have over the candy he's consuming versus the candy consuming the kid? And that's totally how I feel this week in Berlinale, but I still can't stop. So this question of the line of where human consciousness can be found is really the line I'm trying to trace. So I guess we can.
So let's look at the clip.
Today, there's an endless supply of technical images. It used to be that only the United States could produce them, with cameras that can see from 50,000 feet away, controlled by people 5,000 miles away. A media production costing billions of dollars. The image on the right is filmed with consumer quality drones and HD cameras that anyone can buy in any electronics store or online. We could ask which of these operational images is more effective, but then we would need to ask, effective for what kind of operation? The image on the right features digital graphics that seem to be part of the technical operation, but in fact, they were created using video post-production software. They aren't part of the military operation shown on screen, but they could be part of a military operation of the screen. If the screen is the battleground, how are the rules of engagement different?
Okay, so I'll just mention briefly the form of the piece is using this technique called desktop documentary, which is actually something that I was involved in developing. It became a thing, I guess it was like a few years ago when people suddenly kind of put the desktop interface on screen as a setting. And given, I don't know how many hours you spend in front of your computer, but yeah, for me it is like the landscape that I'm staring at most hours of the day. And then, so I made this video called Transformers, a pre-make that actually played here in Berlin 3 years ago. And and actually this year in the Panorama, there's a film called Profile that takes place completely on a computer screen. So now it's entering mainstream Hollywood filmmaking as well. So it's interesting how quickly we kind of just start to accept this as a new sort of aesthetic normal. But I want to resist that actually. I want to create some kind of critical distance and awareness with these sort of image technologies and platforms that we take for granted. And it's also kind of a tactic of what happens when you're not one of the best photographers in the world or image makers in the world, because I'm not nearly as talented as you are with creating original images, and so I've made my living, with video essays, with turning other people's material into a new sort of material with my kind of critical awareness appended to it. So it's my kind of strategy for bringing value and transforming the work into something else. Again, you work with what you've got. But the weird thing is that there's a similar thing going on with these ISIS terrorists. They don't have amazing, they don't have planes that fly anywhere in the world and incredibly sophisticated cameras. What do they have? They have a drone, they have a GoPro, and they have Adobe After Effects to add these graphics that make it look like it's this super expensive high-tech surveillance technology that they have. And then they're able to upload that and seduce people online with this appearance of technological luxury, So I'm really fascinated in this kind of resourcefulness, one that I identify with, one that I have championed as a sort of DIY, guerrilla, low-budget, ingenious approach, and then seeing this antithetical, dark mirror, version of that. And so this investigation of drones has actually led me to find the most prolific producer of drone videos in Syria. He's sort of like the Syria drone superstar. And he's actually from Russia, and he produces drone videos for Russian state media that go viral. And so he's kind of involved in the campaign of the Russian media, which is combined with the Russian military, to sort of tell the story of how Russia is doing the job in Syria of fighting terrorism that the U.S. has basically neglected or forfeited. And he's become an Instagram star. So it's interesting to see how he's, just like, you work in different contexts, I work in different contexts, this guy's working in different contexts, and it's seeing how he's kind of doing that to advance himself and also advance a larger campaign that that he's working for. And so now I'm on the brink of being Facebook friends with him, but I'm kind of afraid of this as well. So I was also curious about the risk of entanglement with your subjects. Are there any moments where you start to feel potentially compromised or sort of at what point do you feel because you're trying to maintain a critical engagement with your subjects, but I mean a lot of them are very charming and they're very and so it's how do you know where you are in relation to them on an ongoing basis? Because that's something I'm continually working on.
I mean, I feel like I'm always I do get really close to the subjects, but they always know that I'm documentarian, filmmaker, photographer, not like a friend. But that doesn't mean that friendship-like qualities don't evolve, like trust and honesty. And I think in a way there's a privilege that is even better than friendship. Like when I was talking with David Siegel and the Queen of Versailles, here was this very powerful, I don't know if I should say charming, because he can be off-putting too, but definitely it was very exciting to talk to this billionaire in such an intimate way. And he was telling me things that he hadn't told his wife or anybody else. And so I think that a lot of times I get the benefit of the fact that people do want to tell their stories to somebody who is listening and wants to hear and can kind of tell them in a very honest way that might get colored if they're a family member or a friend or something like that. It was interesting because in this new movie, my children are in it, my parents are in it, and one of the things that comes up with my son is how my work and traveling a lot has affected him. And so we did this interview, our first interview, and I think when I interview somebody, there's a real intensity to it where I'm really listening hard, not just for what they're saying, but what is behind what they're saying. And my total focus is on them. And after the interview, Noah said, "Mom, I don't think I've ever talked to you that long before." And I think what he meant was that with no distraction, not I'm cooking or I'm reading the paper or 5 interruptions or the phone rings or the cell phone or whatever it is beeps. And it's just like that total attention, which is a very kind of special connection, and it's not something that it's kind of a luxury that I don't have in my regular life with people. And so, so anyway, I think it is this kind of privileged relationship. So I don't really deal with kind of fear of entanglement. It doesn't really come up like that. It's funny because with my mom and the Maya, I feel like it comes up a lot more because that's a culture of favors and asking for money and that kind of thing. And so I feel like sometimes she gets embroiled in like somebody asking for money or needing this. But I kind of go with the practice of journalism, like never pay anybody, never show them the work before it's finished. So I don't really have to deal with the kind of, like last night, Florian Holm, we'll see a clip of him. He's a hedge fund banker who made $800 million and then kind of climbed too high, couldn't stop, and was indicted for defrauding investors of $200 million and lost everything, went to jail, lost his family. And somebody asked him at the Q&A yesterday, did you have some control over the process because you're somebody that really curates your own image? He's written 2 books, and he said not at all, which he didn't, and he never asked for it. But that would be the kind of entanglement that I would not get into because I just don't do that. But that would be a slippery slope if, you know, you did.
And there's also another kind of entanglement, which is more maybe the ethical responsibility you have towards your audience or towards the people you're depicting in another way. Because you could also say that a book like that is super aspirational. When I look at it, although my first reaction was, I'm glad that I have weird pants. But like people could aspire to become like that, and in that sense you're also aggravating or aggrandizing or multiplying certain images into the world.
Well, I think you're saying that because of the way the book looks, but which is my intention, but I pretty much guarantee that after you've read the book, you won't feel that way. And that's really a technique that I use in a way, is part of my work is about the seduction of the material culture and the popular culture and celebrity culture. And so I've always worked with very saturated colors and kind of appropriating in a way the aesthetics of the kind of glossy magazine and the fashion image. And there's a lot of beautiful people and beautiful sexy bodies and a kind of candy-coated sugar that seduces you. But it's a really kind of dark, hard vision in the book, going from, you know, people literally having their faces pulled off and plastic surgery to women in kind of utter like sexual humiliation and objectification. And so pornography and the crash and kind of people's lives in ruins. And so I think that I kind of try to bring people in and then they leave with something different. And so actually we had this amazing experience the other day, and the show is up at the Nobel Peace Center in Oslo. And some of the two of the people that came were these celebrities that they call the Kardashians of Norway. And I was just thinking, like, what are they going to think about when they hear my talk? Because the Kardashians are this touchstone, but for the way people try to aspire to them, and it's a pretty negative look at that. And so I think it was amazing to have them kind of take this in. So that's really what I'm aspiring to, is to not preach to the converted, to bring in the people who, you know, would be interested in People magazine or a reality show, which is kind of what happened with the Queen of Versailles, and then take them to a deeper, more critical place.
I think time-wise, before we open up the floor for questions from the audience, we have time for one of your clips, so you can choose.
Let's show the addiction clip.
The addiction clip, that's clip number 5.
Harvard Business School teach you how to be a good person?
No,
So
we're
can we have
fine-tuned to
clip
rule the
number 4
world.
instead?
That's
Because
it.
this is not the clip.
Is it loud enough, Frank? Can you make it a little louder? So I'll just set this up. This is kind of where my I've narrated the film, but this is kind of where my personal story starts to come in, and I realize that consumerism is an addiction, like many other addictions.
Does Harvard Business School teach you how to be a good person?
Same one.
No, we're fine-tuned to rule the world. That's it.
My dad was always like a larger-than-life figure, casting like a huge shot.
At least we saw Florian twice.
Yes.
Can you make it a little bit louder, please? It should be the next clip. I've always thought that balance was kind of overrated. I'm often chasing my own obsessions with as much adrenaline as my subjects. Even though I wasn't going for tons of money or the perfect body, I was always looking for more and more. I'm gonna be pretty wide, so you'll be behind me. Let's see how this works. Okay, look at me. You can look up like that, like you were a second ago. Yeah. Look up again like you just were. Beautiful.
I don't think I'm meeting my fitness goals. I would love to see this fixed. I would love to see my thighs fixed. My butt needs to be fixed.
I saw a similar addiction among women with eating disorders.
I would lose 5 pounds and it still wasn't good enough. And then I lose 5 more and it still wasn't good enough.
The fame, it's such a rush. You know, instant tweets and instant posts. Wow.
Every day I see dancers that are addicted to the pole money.
Success becomes its own perpetual vehicle. You're part of this game where the more the better again. And $1 billion is better than 100 million. I was a hamster in a diamond-studded gold wheel.
You sell your soul to the devil. Because you get burnt out so bad that you just numb it. Where you don't feel the hand on your ass anymore. We detach, and then you put on the game again. If not, it destroys you.
There is this place that is too far and everyone ends up there. When money is success, it's impossible to not want to keep going. Why wouldn't you? Because if a lot is good, more is better.
You were trapped in your own ambition.
Right now, breaking news here, stocks all around the world are tanking because of the price.
Capital, like any other resource in excess, will cause utter social and economic havoc.
And now we're all stupefied. And for those who didn't get it, actually, Chris Hedges, the journalist, also in your film, repeats this and says that the beauty in the media eventually will lead to collapse and to war. So that's why we're having the two of you here on stage. You still want to have some quick remarks on kind of why it was so important to have this in the film, because it's rather alarmist as well. Kind of an alarmist sort of thing to say, or?
And I think there are probably other things in the film that are even more alarmist, like when Chris Hedges says, kind of the planet's going down, or this time we'll destroy ourselves. I mean, I think that all of the stories that I was tracking including my own, kind of come together here. We have, in a way, like you said, I've always looked at extreme situations, but really to look at the mainstream, because I think that we kind of swim in the messages and in the popular culture every day, and it's sometimes hard to see if we don't pull it out. Like, for example, one of the characters is a child beauty pageant who's a kind of very sexualized beauty pageant star, and it's not because I wanted to investigate beauty pageants. It's because she's kind of a expression of the way girls kind of start to value themselves through their bodies and through their beauty. And so I think for me, I learned in this project that wealth wasn't just about consumerism, it was also the kind of the currency of beauty, the currency of sexuality, the currency of fame, and all of my characters are kind of chasing these different versions of wealth, and with a kind of obsession that I ended up feeling like was addiction. And Florian, when he said, we're in this gold-plated hamster wheel, really gave voice. So I felt like this, you're seeing all of these kind of disparate stories, and this scene starts to bring them together, and you see how they're connected.
So Kevin, I mean, you're studying or researching another extreme. What does that tell us about the mainstream, and is violence as addictive as wealth?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of have the theory that if ISIS didn't exist, we'd have to invent it, because it's just, there seems to be some kind of desire for within the mainstream Western media for some kind of demonized other through which to kind of wage this perpetual struggle or this conflict of who we are and who we are not. And so it is kind of a similar way of looking at an extreme in terms of diagnosing what it is that the mainstream is looking for. It's about, it really is about desire. I mean, when I think about one word that sums all of this up, even my own history with making video essays, it's not so much about understanding movies per se, it's understanding what I'm looking for when I watch a film. What does a video essay reveal about my act of viewing and what I'm looking for? So it's really like a two-way mirror. I'm looking at the movie, but I'm also looking at myself as an active spectator. And I think this is an important thing because we have more power over media than we ever had, and it's important to understand what the stakes of that power is, what it means for you to create an image and put it out there in the world. What does that image do? How does it contribute, or how does it add to the pollution of the media landscape? And how does it reveal what your desires and intentions and ideologies are in relation to others? I mean, the thing is that clip with Chloe, that was kind of made off the cuff, just sort of as a way to kind of proof of concept. And I thought, this is great, just put it out there, because I think people should see it. She put it out there, it got a really good response, we got invited to a couple talks with it, but then what happened that we completely did not think about was that the ISIS media superstar's sister contacted her and wrote to her and said, could I have a copy of the whole thing? Because she thought it was like a whole big project. It was like, well, we're still working on it. And she thought, well, I just want to say that this is really great what you're doing. That actually, because at first we were like, really, okay, what's she gonna say? And she said, actually, this is really great what you're doing. It's clear that your intentions are noble, that you're trying to do a service to him. So it's really it really reveals something about how transparent your desires are, how legible other people can read what your desires are. And I think this is why so many of your subjects are comfortable working with you, because they can read your desire of what you're wanting to get across by working with them and capturing their lives. So so I think that just not being afraid, if you trust the nature of your interests, of your intentions, and you're not afraid of putting it out there, you have to trust that people can read that, and that actually enables you to build and make it a much richer project than if you're just trying to be overly polite, overly cautious, and overly considerate, because that can actually end up hemming you in more than you need to.
I think we had an almost psychoanalytical talk about image, and the big secret that was uncovered here are these Freudian terms, fear and desire, and how they sort of inform what we're doing. I really hope that the audience has some really lighthearted questions for you, because otherwise we will go out all serious and depressed. So now it's time for you to ask questions. There is this amazing microphone that will be thrown to you, so it's actually also a bit of an exercise to stay awake.
Hello? Yep, okay. In the Queen of Versailles, I just remember watching that and feeling like you're almost always on the border of like disliking her, but you never really do, Jackie, when you're watching that. And then you almost feel like some sort of pity for her, but you're also like laughing with her. And it's this very weird thing, because when you're watching it, you don't really feel like at least I didn't feel like that's how I would go out feeling with her. So I don't know how much of that was just her character and how much it was in you kind of protecting her in the editing or in the post-production of that. I don't know if you can talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say a little bit of both. It really reflected my experience with Jackie. So when I first met them, they were building the biggest house in America. They were full of kind of arrogance and pride, and very happy to participate because they were showing me this biggest house in America that they were building. And in the first scene, David is sitting on a gold throne, and I'm photographing him, and I'm very much in the kind of respecting their position, and he's telling me how it is. And by the end of the film, Jackie's barefoot, and she's wearing no makeup, and she's just kind of like, and we're talking much more as equals in a way. I think that their story was so crazy and supersized and over the top and funny in a way, and it starts like that you think that it's almost going to be like a satire. You think you're going to be laughing at these people, and then what happens in the film as we get to know her, and also as she gets brought down to earth by the crisis and kind of thinking she might lose everything, I think what happens is we realize that, first of all, that she's quite likable, but second of all, that their story really mirrors so many stories from the middle class and working class and all over kind of America in the run-up to the crash. And that what they did, we kind of all did to different extents, whether it was buying something on our credit card that we couldn't afford, or getting into a car loan, or whatever it was. So you kind of see yourself, I think, in the end, in Jackie. And so that's kind of what I try to do. I mean, in a way, there was a similar structure in the viral video, Like a Girl. Did any of you see Like a Girl? And I'm asking people, what does it mean to run like a girl? And they're kind of making fun of it. And so you start out laughing, and then as girls and boys kind of realize how disempowering it is to have this word girl used as an insult, you kind of start crying. So in a way, the laughter is a way to bring you in and disarm you in a way, and then you can really see that it's a tragedy, not a comedy. And I think Queen of Versailles also kind of starts like a comedy and ends up a tragedy.
Thanks.
I think now you can throw that mic to someone else who has a question. Oh, that's not so hard.
I had a related question about the Queen of Versailles as well. So you were talking about your engagement with the subject, and when you were filming Jackie and David, is it? It seemed to me that there was a difference in what they perceived the camera was sort of, the story that the camera was really telling, and the story that eventually gets told. I mean, were you sort of maintaining a balancing act in the sense of the initial part of it, at least, where it sort of does come across as a comedy, and I mean, were you making some conscious choices to make sure that a story is coming across, but they still didn't know the story that's being told?
I would actually argue with that. If you look at the transcripts of all the interviews, it's clear that we're both know exactly what the story is. I mean, Jackie a lot of times I'm getting the ideas for the stories and for the point of view from the subjects. Like, for example, there's a picture of a 13-year-old that's in the book, but also in the movie, and he's at a bar mitzvah party where his head is kind of in the breasts of this woman who's a go-go dancer, and they hired go-go dancers in a nightclub to come to the party. And he's talking about, you know, how you have to spend $50,000 on a bar mitzvah, but he also says money ruins kids. And that was one of my first interviews, and so I saw how you could be kind of in the eye of the storm, totally immersed in the culture, but also critical of it. And Jackie and David were very much the same way. Like Jackie, as things were going bad, I mean, first we started looking at the biggest house in America and kind of this American dream on steroids. I would say in the beginning, we didn't really know each other's agenda, but as we kept going, and it was over a 2-year period, and we spent a lot of time together, Jackie was the one who was saying when they started having financial problems, my story is like all of these other people that I grew up with in working class Binghamton story, except for bigger. And so we would often talk about, you know, what the story was about, that they're kind of this American dream, rags to riches story, but that they went into too much debt like everybody else. I think that the one place where we diverged was our concepts of the ending. David Siegel did not like that the ending was him losing the $600 million building. And he never would have wanted that ending. He wanted the ending, and even in an interview, he says, when I save that building, I want you to be there. Because he was on board and conscious of the whole story, except for that he wanted the ending to be his heroic saving of the building. And actually, for me, I found that it was much more powerful to have him actually learn something from the experience and talk about how, at the end, he talks about how people should have been happy with what they had. He should have built less. He should have lived within his means. So in that film, it's actually David who tells the moral of the story. But his postscript is a little bit different, and I address that in the next film.
Thank you.
So, where can you throw the blue cube to? Come on, Talent Press.
Back again. Hi, I thought it was a very interesting combination between both of you, because I seem to notice how you use the medium differently, and how you also actually have a different philosophy on what meta is. And I would like to ask both of you, like, how have you come to the decision to use, for instance, this, well, I would say exhibitionist also in your style, and for you maybe more of an essayistic approach, and if it actually, and how does the audience that you want to reach, how does it mix, or your intention? Like, does it meet?
Well, I would actually say that your film has this essayistic, it's a very reflective, very introspective film, especially as the more it goes on, the more introspective it gets, and that's what I love about it. But yeah, I guess it's really knowing. It gets back to desire. I mean, that's just the word that just keeps coming back. It's just like the point where you suddenly are confronted with your desire, when you're no longer just desiring, and then suddenly something throws you backwards, and then you can actually see your desire. I think that's the moment that's most compelling to me. That's actually one of the most compelling, going back to your film, this one of the young, the people that you filmed when he was very young, the hip-hop artists. There's this moment at the very end when he's seeing a photo of himself from 25 years ago, and the look on his face when he's confronted with his past self and the past set of desires that he had. That's the kind of feeling that I would ideally want to create in my viewer, when they're suddenly confronted with what they thought they knew, what they thought they wanted, what they thought they understood about the world, about movies, about everything. So whatever it takes to get there, and we both have our strategies, that to me is like what cinema is really about. Cinema being this alternative space that allows us to see our reality differently. The thing is, though, that there's so much media now that media is the reality that we have to now kind of detach from in order to see more clearly. So in a way, the equation has become inverted. The equation of the Bazinian proposition that cinema allows us to understand our reality differently is now different. It's like now we need to rethink our relationship to reality in order to see the role of media. And all of you who are here in this program, in this festival, have a role in that. So, and I think a lot of you are probably thinking, well, I just want to have a nice job and, like I'll worry about those existential questions later. But no, that's the thing is like, you can't defer those types of choices. And the sooner you confront them, the sooner you arrive at a position where you can actually produce an image of true value. And you're not just part of this giant commodity producing network that just keeps wanting to hypnotize us and seduce us in this desired network.
I agree with everything he said.
But I think there was also a part about the exhibitionism in your question, how you sort of, maybe I can rephrase that a little bit, because both of you sort of present yourselves in your work. Maybe in your case a bit more obvious because you've seen her working, whereas Kevin and Chloe are only present through writing and voice, which actually in a way can be more exhibitionistic at the same time.
Well, actually the goal, because the film is 10 video essays and the first 5 are mostly desktop based, but the next 5 will actually be us in the real world interacting with the people that we were initially researching online. So that creates interesting, and I think that's super relevant to kind of like the modes of experience we have today, where so much of our network are just, names on a computer screen or a cell phone screen. They're not people you actually interact with IRL, but trying to put that on one side, and then what does real life interaction mean in juxtaposition with the online sphere of knowledge, of social relations. So it's really a contrast we want to enact.
And
I guess I see the film, I think maybe people haven't seen the film, so it's a little bit out of context on the clips. I see the film as an essay film where the characters, including myself, kind of help drive the essay. So it's not actually a film about me, except for that I'm kind of mediating the journey. So I don't see it in those terms exactly.
Okay. One more question. How do you feel when you show the movie to your characters and to the scene?
Well, I guess the first time we had a chance to show work to the characters was the scene that Kevin was talking about, where at the end of the film, I have the show, and a lot of the characters come and look at their own pictures. And it was really powerful. It was really like a crazy, like I've never done anything like that. And Tiffany Masters, who's a VIP hostess, who I started photographing maybe like 12 years ago, 12, 15 years ago, she came and she was reading her interview on the wall and started to cry. And I think it was like kind of about her dreams, some of which hadn't worked out exactly as she thought, and seeing herself, like you were saying, kind of what she was projecting at the time. And so it was very kind of painful and confronting. I think for others like Gmo, it was more like, whoa, that's me. Like, you can call me Gmo, that guy in there, but he wasn't really that anymore. In terms of the finished movie, some people have seen it and some people haven't. Last night we had Florian home with us, and he also started to cry when he did the Q&A. And I think he liked it, and he liked the intent of it. And I think it was also hard to see, too, because he makes himself very vulnerable in it, and I think it reminds him of the family relationships that he's lost.
Now you have to throw that blue box to the other side, just so I know. Are there any other questions? questions? Or have we been talking about so much? There's two more questions at this side, so we're gonna collapse.
Oh dear, it broke.
There needs to be a talent press person to ask a question. You guys are the journalists. You need to.
Does it work like this? Yeah.
No.
Yeah, I was just curious, because in terms of using images, like in terms of censorship and rights of images, because I study at a film school and I also work on essayistic formats, and there's such a huge difference in dealing with this between the art scene and the cinema. And like in our film school, we are just really not allowed to use any images, mainly because they pay for the films, so it's a too big risk to use like real images. So, but on the other side, I think it's like really, important for cinema to use, images that represent a reality of media and capitalism or whatever, like use the signs directly, not always find another way of telling them. So I was just interested in your experience with that, and if you always take the risks.
This definitely. What country are you from, by the way?
I live in Berlin. Yeah, I'm German.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I was at a film scholars conference just a few days ago in Bochum, and we did a video essay workshop. Everyone was like, "Oh my gosh, this is so exciting! This is going to be great." But we're too scared because of copyright problems, because Germany is really strict. And I was like, look, if you keep running into that wall, you're never gonna get anywhere. And so, at the end of the day, you gotta ask yourself, is this really worth it? Because if it's worth it, then you take the risks, and then you kind of have to, you can't play by the established rules of copyright if those rules are preventing you from achieving what is that you feel is worthwhile and really meaningful to you. Then you really gotta agitate, and then we started singing songs from Les Miserables, and it was really great. But one of my mentors in Chicago, he said, look, there's copyright, but then there's also copying it right. I mean, that was his sort of concept, which is, like if you play by copyright, that's strictly, by the rules, law, whatever, then you're just gonna stay in that space. But if what you want to accomplish goes outside of that, then you have to take ownership of that fact, and then you have to make an argument for why your act of copying is right. Because once you've made that argument for yourself, a moral argument, a legal argument, whatever, aesthetic argument, political argument, then you're as responsible for publishing that as you are for publishing your film. As a critic, the critics here is, critics understand that it's not just about films, like it's also creating a frame of understanding, a context, an argument that allows us to appreciate why a film is useful. So in this case, you have to be your own critic, and you have to be your own best arguer for why what you want to do matters and deserves to exist. And then, if you believe in that, once you've resolved that with yourself, then you've won.
I have a slightly more, I brought probably a little more.
I'm sure you have a slightly more nuanced take on it.
Well, because I'm a photographer, so we've spent our lives, earning our living from copyright and content. On the other hand, as a filmmaker and in Generation Wealth, I've brought in images from reality TV and from the Trump campaign, and images that I didn't make and that were not licensed. Probably they would not give us the license for. But for me, the difference is if you're appropriating content and making it look like your own, that is not cool copying. That's just stealing. But if you are, and in the US, we have fair use, which has actually become much, much more liberal in the time that I've been a filmmaker, and now fair use is very, very broad, and we're able to use a huge amount of images. I would say anything in Kevin's work would fall under fair use because he has a critical approach where he's talking about the images and what they mean. And that's how the work also was in Generation Wealth. If you're criticizing, if you're speaking about, if you're commenting on, if you're satirizing, all of that would be allowable under fair use. If you're taking, Wes Anderson and saying it's yours,
Yeah, right.
that's different.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, it's you have to set the terms and the rules and the logic. You have to program the app, you know, to justify why you deserve to make this. Yeah, I mean, you're not entitled to just copy and paste and just put it and put your name on it. You actually have to earn it, but you have to know for yourself why you deserve it.
Okay, I'm afraid I have to wrap it up, but I'm sure that Kevin and Lauren will be outside in case there are any more pressing questions. Otherwise, you just have to follow Lauren around at her screenings because she will be doing lots more of Q&As. So first of all, I wanted to thank the audience for being with us and being so attentive and asking questions, even though that side might work on their questioning skills a bit. But most of all, I really want to thank Kevin and Lauren for being a part of this kind of an essayistic talk, which was also a bit of an experiment, bringing Eros and Thanatos together here. And I think it worked really well, so I really want to thank you for playing along. Thank you so much.